Hi, welcome back to this Thursday edition of Focal Point on AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. Program is Focal Point Network is AFR Talk. Great to have you in the listening audience with us in the conversation today. I'll just read this without comment. Oh, by the way, I ought to mention this. Remember, one of the things I've said about the problem with raising taxes on the wealthy, it sounds easy. It's sort of low-hanging fruit. You can stick it to the man. You can punish the wealthy, which Barack Obama seems to be intent on doing. It's not going to affect 98% of the people who are foolish enough to think it doesn't hurt them. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want your son and daughter to have a job, where do they get those jobs? They get those jobs from job creators, from small businesses. These are the very people that just got punished by this fiscal cliff bill. So it's not in your best interest. If you're one of the 98% and you want your kids to have a job when they get out of college, you don't want to see the job creators punished. And with us on our decision maker line is a lawmaker who understands some of these dynamics, Representative Tim Huelskamp from the 1st District in Kansas, and one of my personal heroes there on Capitol Hill. Representative Huelskamp, welcome to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Brian, good afternoon. Thanks for having me on.
Great to have you with us, Representative Huelskamp. You've been on the program before, and I just want to tell you again how much I admire the work you do on Capitol Hill and the stand that you take. And maybe we could begin by having you share with us some of your reservations about the fiscal cliff bill that passed on Monday night.
Well, Brian, I am, officially now a sophomore. My third year in Congress just began today. But in looking back over the last 2 years, this Congress and this president together have pushed through deal after deal, Brian, that didn't provide solutions. It was the typical Washington insiders that clapped themselves on the back and said they did a good job. And what passed just a few days ago, this fiscal cliff deal, again, it's not a solution. It increased taxes on 77% of American households, especially the small businesses that you mentioned. They're going to be hammered. The job creators are being hammered. It also increased spending. So more spending, more taxes, did nothing about entitlements to save and secure Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security. And it also included all kinds of corporate welfare handouts. 4 strikes, you're out. It's just, to me, the capstone of a disappointing capstone on a disappointing 2 years. We had a brand new majority, 87 new freshmen, and we end up on the last day, the last vote, to increase taxes, increase spending, and do nothing for the fundamental overspending problem here in America.
I think one of the concerns that a lot of us have, Representative Huelskamp, is that President Obama, when he spiked the football after the vote was taken before he flew back to Hawaii, he basically indicated, look, I'm just getting started here in taking more revenue from wealthy Americans and from American corporations. Again, he seems to be determined to continue to punish the very people that we're counting on to create jobs.
I think that's his intent. I mean, he has a different view of the economy. And he has a view that government should run everything. A bunch of elites in Washington should make decisions. And, that hadn't worked out very well. It hadn't worked out in world history. It didn't work out in the communist centers of the world. And it hadn't worked out for 4 or 5 years here in America. We need free enterprise, not the other way around. But what bothers me as well, Brian, is far too many of my Republican colleagues don't understand that about the president, what his ultimate goals are. And they sit here and attempt to negotiate with a guy and don't use all the tools at our disposal to fight for conservative principles, and that's frustrating. Given what we know where the president's at, it's a question now: are Republicans going to stand up for the conservative Americans that got them elected and are going to hold them accountable? And again, a very disappointing 2 years because I think oftentimes we failed to follow through on what we promised.
Congressman, I do not want to put words in your mouth, so I'm saying this, you are not, but I would like to get your kind of response. When the president talks over and over again about the wealthy Americans paying their fair share as if they weren't paying their fair share of the tax burden, we know that they pay a disproportionate amount of the tax revenue that goes to the federal government. And no matter how much Congress decides to take from the job creators, he wants to take more. And it just seems to me that what he's saying, in other words, is from each according to his ability and to each according to his need, which is the socialist kind of manifesto. I mean, we're not that far away from a president that actually believes that and wants to implement that governing philosophy.
In his statement about the fiscal cliff deal, one of the proudest parts of his statement, which, by the way, Republicans use that as a message as well by the Republican conference, put that out as somehow our own points. It concluded that we now have the most progressive income tax system in decades. There are other countries around the world that have less progressivity in their tax code, which means we hammer the rich more than most other countries around the world. And for this president, it's not enough. He will be back tomorrow as State of the Union. He will come back and say we need to tax them more. We need to tax everybody more. They need, and it's not just about taxes, Brian. It's about government control of our lives, whether it's deciding what doctor we're going to see under Obamacare. By the way, $1 trillion tax increase in Obamacare, the bulk of that kicked in on January 1st. On top of all these tax increases, this is a double, triple hammer on the economy that, frankly, I believe it drives us into recession and long-term could bankrupt the country.
Now, the House is going to be dealing with a Sandy relief bill, I believe, tomorrow, at least the first part of it. And one of the concerns that a lot of us have that have looked at some of the details of the bill is that it seems to be loaded up with pork. What's your take on the Sandy relief bill in its current form?
Well, it certainly is loaded up with pork. I am not convinced yet. Based on the numbers we've heard, again, it's hard to get them out of the administration, but it's my understanding FEMA, which would be spending the money, has billions of dollars right now. They can't spend it all quick enough, and for some reason, this administration and Republicans in the House and Senate decided we're going to start spending more money. I mean, they can't spend it quick enough. Kind of reminds me of the stimulus package time. But, of course, people in that area, they need some help. But, again, if you have $10, $20 billion sitting cash on hand and you can't get it spent, why exactly does the first action of this Congress have to be is to pass a $60 billion spending bill that, again, we don't have the money for, Brian? That's the decision. We don't have the money. We're going to have to borrow the money and spend it when we can't even spend the money we have right now. And so, and it is full of pork.
And that brings up the question of the debt ceiling. Representative Huelskamp, I'm talking to Tim Huelskamp from the state of Kansas, representing the 1st District there. We're going to have a showdown over the debt ceiling and increase in the debt ceiling. And I want to get your take on this as a member of Congress and how you're going to position yourself on this, because President Obama said again, when he was spiking the football Monday night, he said, look, I'm not going to negotiate again with the Republicans on this. It's going to be a take it or leave it proposition. I just want an increase in the debt ceiling, no strings attached, no caveats, no concessions, no entitlement reforms, no spending cuts. It's just kind of a take it or leave it thing. And I played the soundbite earlier from Senator Toomey saying, look, we need to be prepared to have a temporary shutdown of government in this standoff. So let me ask you this question, Congressman Huelskamp. What do you think is going to happen when the debt ceiling debate takes place? How is the House of Representatives going to respond to President Obama basically throwing down on you guys, saying, I'm not talking to you, I'm not negotiating? What do you think is going to happen?
I'm very worried about that because this is, I believe, Brian, the one opportunity we really have in the next 2 years to actually bring spending under control, at least start to do that. And the last time we had a debt ceiling, let's recall what happened, August 2011. They overspent everything, and they said, hey, we need more money on the credit card. At the end of the day, the U.S. House and the Speaker and the Senate gave the President $2.1 trillion in new borrowing authority and said, but we're going to make some spending cuts. What they did in this fiscal cliff deal, Brian, was make certain spending cuts never happened from that deal. So if they're going to do the same old thing again, we're going to have a downgrade in our credit rating, which means in real terms it's going to make it more costly for us to borrow money and could jeopardize our entire system of government if we don't do something about the spending. So we have a great opportunity. But the last time we had that opportunity, the Republicans in the House and Senate didn't hold firm, didn't identify conservative principles. They let Barack Obama borrow that money with no cuts. And for him to stand up and say he wants to do it again, I would say the same thing if I was the president and wanted unlimited borrowing and spending authority. But again, the power of the purse remains in the House and the Senate, and unless the House gives him that authority, if we stand firm, we can actually begin to change this country for the better.
Let me ask you 2 quick questions in closing. One has it has to do with the use of the word default. We keep hearing the word default, default, default. And my understanding, Congressman, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, the only way the United States can go into sovereign default is if it does not pay the interest on the debt. And right now, that only takes about $220 billion a year, which is about 10% of what the federal government receives in tax revenue. And I've been hearing some Republicans talking about the fact we can't go into default with that, and they're including in that entitlement spending.
Default is, I believe, a red herring. It was actually after the last debt deal, a few weeks later, the Vice President of the United States announced we were never going to default. For your very point you raised, Brian, it's about paying our interest. They receive hundreds of billions of dollars in tax revenue every single month, every few weeks. There's $2.5 trillion to $2.8 trillion comes in the Treasury every year, and so you got to pay the debt. But what happened last time was they used that as a means to make certain there were no spending cuts, to continue the spend and borrow fiasco. So, yeah, that will be said over and over, but let's quote the Vice President of the United States says we're never going to default. So for once, I agree with him. But the real issue is not default, it's downgrade. There are three major credit rating agencies in the world that determine how good a credit rating you are. When you go into the banker, they have that list. Well, America has that same list for our federal government, or the same credit rating agencies. After the last bad deal in August 2011, S&P downgraded us, one of the three. Moody's has threatened to downgrade. There are two of three. There's a third one out there. It will be a major financial disaster. If nothing happens, we borrow money and not cut spending, we'll be downgraded by another entity. As a result, that's what happened to Greece. Their credit rating was downgraded. They couldn't pay their interest on their debt, and they couldn't meet their obligations. And we do not want to do that. We're getting perilously close to that here in this country.
Last question, about 45 seconds left. How will you vote when the debt ceiling comes before the House of Representatives?
If it's as the president wants, which raise the debt ceiling and not cut spending, I'm a no. I mean, we have a spending problem in this country. I will be a no unless it's a solution. Far too often in Washington, it's about deals and backroom deals. And for 2 years of that, for 2 decades of that, now it's time for some real solutions, real leadership in Washington. We're going to fight for that, and we're going to continue to make certain, do our best to represent the American people's desires to save their country.
Our guest has been Representative Tim Huelskamp, representing the 1st District of the state of Kansas, one of the true blue conservatives, fiscal and social, on Capitol Hill. And Congressman, thank you so much for taking time to be with us.
Hey, thank you, Brian.
All right, you bet. Representative Tim Huelskamp from the state of Kansas. Again, one of the 9 Republicans that did not vote to reseat John Boehner as the Speaker of the House. He was one of the congressmen that was actually punished by Speaker Boehner by being bounced off committee assignments because of his strong fiscal conservative stand. Focal Point AFR Talk, back with Rabbi Shmuley Bulteak right after this. Stay with us.